Good Monday morning, and thanks for listening to my musing today. I've been musing about love because today is Valentine's Day. Well, for me, it's Valentine's Day, or at least that's kind of true. For you, it's at least a week after Valentine's Day. The case is, if I can tell you a little secret, I actually record these in advance so that you get them fresh on Monday mornings. And technically, today's not Valentine's Day. Yesterday was because we had a little tech glitch. Nonetheless, I've been thinking about love and Cupid and hearts and chocolates and all those sorts of things, and that's what I want to talk to you about. Isn't it strange that whenever we talk about the things that we love and the ways that we love them, we have one word to describe the whole range of our love? So whether you're at a wedding where soulmates are being joined together and they talk about their undying love for one another, we use the same word, love, that we do for loving a certain pizza joint or loving a certain show on Netflix. We love certain smells and certain sounds, and all these things we love. In Greek, and perhaps you've heard this before, there are several words for love, and depending on your list, if you were to Google or Wikipedia or whatever the case may be, search for love, that you'd see somewhere between 4, 6, 7, 8 different Greek words for love. And so, as you might have been thinking around Valentine's Day, if love in all of its forms seems like Greek to you, well, maybe if you stick around, we can help explain some of those things. How do we understand agape love, the love that God has for us, unconditional, not necessarily requited, not dependent on anything that we do, but simply given freely, divine, agapic love? Erotic love, or eros, the love that often speaks to lust or passion or sex, but maybe even more importantly to our desires and our wants. It's also interesting around Valentine's Day that eros, the Greek word, is one of the minor gods, and in the Roman pantheon that would be Cupid, again, appropriate to talk about on Valentine's Day. There's Storga, which is something like affection or adorable kinds of love, the puppy dog, scratch the ear, oh so cute little baby cooing sorts of heart-welling love that we might get. So agape, storge, eros, and then phileo, which perhaps you've heard. Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love because phileo is brotherly or friendly or siblings kind of love. Different than agape, family, unconditional love, maybe something like the love that we have for blood brothers, or the love that you would have, not blood brothers, a band of brothers, the love that you might have for people in a foxhole, or someone you kind of adopt as a brother. Of course, this applies to sisters too. Another couple of forms of love, again not appearing in every list, but xenia would be a kind of love or hospitality that we show to strangers. In Greek we have the word xenophobia, which would mean a fear of the stranger or a fear of welcoming others. And we have a couple of other terms. Something like philutia would be self-love. In one form that's good, like self-esteem, and another form that's bad, like egotism. And this more or less rounds out the list. So if you're interested in any of those, if love seems like it's Greek to you, I hope that you'll stick around and we can explore not just Cupid, but the ways that these ways of understanding love in all its forms might help us to show love and receive love just a little bit better, even a week after Valentine's Day. I hope you'll stick around. The word agape, the word most often used in the Bible for love, is used over 100 times. In 1 John 4, when we hear that God is love, agape is the Greek word that is used there. And so we have this sort of divine connection, and it might be the case, especially within the church, that our understandings of God frame the ways we think about that kind of love more than the other way around. Because in Greek, in the language of the New Testament, we would see that God is love is maybe more descriptive than love is God. Because at least in English, we might get the idea that erotic love would be like God. And so that God, as we imagine it in the Christian tradition, would be more like Cupid. But we'll talk about Cupid and how Cupid is a kind of trickster god in just a minute. Greater love has no one than this, one who lays down life for a friend. That love would be agapic sorts of love. And agape is the word that Paul uses famously in 1 Corinthians 13, the passage you're probably familiar with from weddings. Love, agape, is patient. Love is kind. It keeps no record of wrongs. It does not boast. It is not jealous. And these sorts of ways of talking about love is talking about agape love, the kind of love that God has for us, and perhaps the love that the church should aspire to. Because it's unconditional, we can hold it and spread it broadly, not on how people respond to us, but because by the nature of God, as a mission of God, we are supposed to spread that kind of love, agape love, to all the world. That's different, I would say, than phileo, brotherly love. And you might be thinking, or at least I think, hey, isn't it the case that we're supposed to have unconditional love for our family if our brother or our sister or our mother is a knucklehead or not managing money well or spiteful or mean or whatever the case may be? Aren't we supposed to love them unconditionally because we are family? And the answer is yes. And then you might say, well, isn't that agape? Isn't that the idea behind Jesus calling God the Father, like a loving Father, like in the story of the prodigal son and the loving Father? You're right about all those sorts of things. Which is why when we talk about phileo, brotherly love, we also might think of it in terms of friendly love, but not a namby-pamby kind. We hear Aristotle talking about love in this way, philic love, throughout 2 books of the Nicomachean Ethics, 2 books out of 7 devoted to this idea of friendship. How do we foster within the church this idea that we are supposed to have regular, caring, soul-connected love that isn't sexual, but it is about creating something like a band of brothers, not blood brothers, but brothers who take care of one another, share common interests, lift one another up, and are stronger together than they are apart. We hear that word used in the New Testament, maybe most famously in Jesus' farewell discourse in John, whenever he's talking to his disciples and says, seemingly with the knowledge that he will not survive in Jerusalem, that I have called you my disciples, but now I call you my friends. Philos, the noun form of this Greek verb phileo, which means to love like a brother or a friend. I don't know if we talk about friendship quite enough in the church generally, as I have done just minutes ago. We talk about agape love, unconditional love, how we show love to everyone who might be in need. But how do we foster phileo love, where we become closer, more intimate? It's not necessarily unconditional, and it's not necessarily without favoritism. Isn't it the case that there are some people in your life who you would run to quickly if they called you and said they had a flat tire or they needed to move or they were in the hospital? And then there are other people where you'd give them priority, but not quite the same priority. How are we supposed to understand love when those things generally are kind of different? Phileo, brotherly love, or sisterly love, or friendship kind of love. That's the second kind. Now what about Storga? Storga, that adorable kind of love, I don't have much to say about it other than there are certain things that seem to tug at our heartstrings that make us well with emotion because things are so cute or so adorable or seem so fragile that we want to care for them. I've said puppies like 3 times already. But what are those other things that you find adorable, that you kind of love or would want to care for, that you would want to cuddle with and show affection to. Storga is not a word that appears very often in any ancient Greek text, and it appears in the New Testament only once as a compound word, as Philestorga. Paul uses that in Romans 12, and that word is often translated as something like devoted, or a devoted kind of friend. The word for that is hapax legomenon, a once occurring word in the New Testament. You're learning so much, all the Greek. This brings me to the fourth love, the love that I find most interesting, not just because it's Valentine's Day, but because it occupies a strange space in my mind between what is good and maybe what is not so good. Erotic love, Eros. In the Greek pantheon, Eros is a god, not only a verb, and we receive that on Valentine's Day in English, perhaps more strongly because Eros is, like I've said already, Cupid. The parents of Cupid, or Eros, are Aphrodite and Ares. And if you remember your classics or your children's versions of the Greek myths, Aphrodite is beautiful and wise, and that makes some sense as we think about what love is like, related to beauty or erotic desire. And then Ares, the god of war. In the Roman pantheon, that would be Mars. So somewhere between beauty and raging battle, we get Eros. The children of Eros, Eros marries Psyche, which would be the Greek word either for our soul or our mind, psychology, psyche. And isn't that interesting? What gives birth to Cupid, what gives birth to our desires, are what we find to be beautiful and what we would be jealous after, what we would war after, what we would fight after. And those help us to understand Cupid's arrows, that when they strike us, we have this burning passion that we would fight for something. And that doesn't just have to be the love of another person. In our deepest desires, perhaps we want to climb a corporate ladder, we want a certain house. Whenever we get to a bidding war at an auction, we think, oh my gosh, I can't believe so-and-so is outbidding me. I really want whatever the thing might be. And so you keep raising your little placard, and then you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just spent that much money on a timeshare or vacation or whatever the case may be. So the parents are beauty and battle. And then the children, married with Psyche, so there's this connection between our desires and our mind, give birth to what we would hear in English most often as voluptuous. You know the word voluptuous. And, what's the other child? Sometimes I have mind blanks because I don't look at my notes too often whenever I do these things. The case being that in our desires, we can see offsprings of them. I'll also mention that Cupid, or Eros, is not only seeking to fulfill our desires, because I think sometimes around Valentine's Day we hope that Cupid shoots an arrow on our behalf so that someone else might desire us, a crush. But I don't think that's quite the way that Cupid works in the myths. Instead, Cupid is a trickster sort of god, or erotic love can be a trickster kind of god, a trickster kind of love, in that our desire, like a crush, doesn't necessarily return our affections or our thinking. In fact, in our desires, we might build things up in our head to be much better than what we would want. Sometimes we talk about that whenever dogs chase a car or a squirrel or a rabbit, and we say if the dog was to catch the car or the rabbit, they wouldn't know what to do with it. When a dog spins around after its tail with all that excitement, if it were actually to catch it, well, then it's bored. The enjoyment, the desire, the fun of it is in the chase. And that seems to be the kind of mischief that Eros, erotic love, or Cupid, spreads in the world. That we build up our desire and our wanting, but the desire is bigger and more captivating than the actual having of that thing which we desire. You work for a promotion. When you get it, you realize, I just sit in an office all day pushing papers, and it's not everything that I thought it was cracked up to be, hypothetically. Desire, erotic love. What are the other kinds of love? I mentioned Xenos, which is stranger love. Strange love sounds like something maybe dirtier than what we would talk about in church, but nonetheless, I think the best translation and way of understanding that would be hospitality. How do we show love and affection to the stranger in our midst? And this term also appears in Matthew 25. So whenever we have Jesus saying, I was a stranger and you welcomed me in, we might see that that is a model for how the church is supposed to operate on that form of love. Love doesn't appear in the passage, but xenia, as a verb and as a noun, appears multiple times in Matthew 25, so that we think towards the stranger, to the one who is hungry, to the one who is thirsty. Extending food, hospitality, a drink, welcome is an important requirement, not only in that text, Matthew 25, but within our congregation, which is a Matthew 25 congregation, saying that in our attempts to be a thriving congregation, to work against systemic poverty and systemic racism, we are supposed to be growing in our love for the stranger. Perhaps in Greek that would be the xenia kinds of love. The last kind of love that I wanted to talk about is philutia, or philutia, perhaps. And how do we understand this notion of self-love that doesn't appear in the New Testament, for whatever that's worth? There's a lot to be said for self-esteem. I have made it known that I am a huge fan of Mr. Rogers, and part of that is that I imagine God saying something to us, and we perhaps should say to ourselves, I like you as you are, exactly and precisely. I think you've turned out nicely, and I like you as you are. We have the golden rule, love others as you love yourself. The assumption is we are supposed to love ourselves. There is supposed to be love directed towards us. That's fairly clear. And when people have incredibly low self-esteem and they don't feel good about themselves or their place in the world or the ways that God might be using them, I hope that the church is a place that corrects those notions. Self-esteem is important. Self-love is important. It might even be a necessity. But the line between self-esteem and self-confidence blurs into egotism or narcissism, another Greek myth. Narcissus, who stares in a lake for so long, admiring his own beauty, that he becomes a flower planted there. So how do we understand this fine line between our erotic desires, the place where we are supposed to desire? I'm fond of the phrase that one's reach should exceed one's grasp, or what's a heaven for? There's nothing wrong with our longings and our yearnings. Isn't it the case that we long and pray, God, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven? Like Isaiah, aren't there times when we say, here I am, Lord, send me? We want to be used. There's a place for our confidence. There's a place for our desires. And at the same time, there are plenty of biblical passages that say our desires are what get us in trouble. It is our selfishness that leads us away from the care from neighbor and love of God, and we become insular, we become self-focused, and these are at the root part of our problem. How we understand love in all of its forms, how we seem to get it right, how we seem to have safeguards so that love isn't simply Greek to me, a foreign concept, but it's something that we come to understand both as we receive it and we give it. These are the things that I find important to muse about, even on Valentine's Day. How do we find a place for our passions, healthy, life-giving outlets for them? How do we understand that we are supposed to receive some of those things as well? Because God gives us good gifts. God puts great things in the world for us to enjoy, even to desire. And at the same time, I know I'm Presbyterian because here I am saying all things in moderation and balance things and learn contentment with what we have, not always with what we want. Somewhere the truth lies in between all of those things. Be aware that this time of the year where we might say little heathen prayers for Cupid and Cupid's arrows to be directed in certain ways, it is tricky business because Cupid is a trickster kind of God, and that erotic kind of love is powerful, and that can be for good or for ill. I hope that you have enjoyed a good Valentine's Day. I hope that you did receive some good chocolates, and as you heard me say in a couple of Sundays ago, I hope that they were not orange creamed unless you really desire and enjoy and love orange cream chocolates. This has been a fun musing for me, and so I hope you enjoy it too. Always, if there is a topic or a thought that you have that you've been musing about, I hope you will email it to me at jsnowden@woodschurch.org. I appreciate your thoughts and your emails, and maybe you will hear me musing about some of those even as soon as next Monday. I'll see you then.